Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this edition of Defense News Weekly, we'll hear the latest on the Air Force's quest for multi-domain command and control, get the details on their combat rescue helicopter, and find out exactly why a new nuclear bomb is delayed. Plus, we'll go up close to the B-52 and find out how such an old plane is kept in the air, with in-depth interviews, up-close video, and leading analysis. This is Defense News Weekly. Welcome to this week's edition of Defense News Weekly. I'm Jeff Martin. We've got a lot to dig into this week, including a sit-down with the Air Force's Chief of Staff and two in-depth looks at the B-52 bomber. But before we see those, here's some headlines. Up first, the U.S. Navy says they've met former Defense Secretary Jim Mattis's goal of 80% mission-capable rates for the FA-18 Super Hornet and EA-18G Growler. According to the head of Naval Air Forces, the results can be traced back to the work of aviation depots and the sustainment enterprise. And it appears the Super Hornet may only be one of two aircraft that Mattis specified to hit that goal. Those two other aircraft specified, the F-22 and F-35, won't meet the goal. But the Air Force's F-16s are expected to hit the mark. And the Senate has again passed a measure to end the emergency that allows President Donald Trump to shift military construction funds to build a southern border wall. But again, the vote did not have a veto-proof majority, meaning that it is likely to be blocked by the president. This already happened back in March, and unless 13 more Republicans cross the aisle, it is unlikely to ever pass. And Italian F-35s are deployed to Iceland to take over the NATO air policing mission there. The deployment of 6 fighters is the first time that the 5th-generation jet will be used for air policing and the first deployment of Italian F-35s. The aircraft are accompanied by a KC-767 tanker, a C-130J, and a maritime patrol aircraft. Both Italy's Air Force and Navy are set to be F-35 customers, and the southern European nation also hosts a final assembly facility for the jets. And the U.S. Air Force has cleared Sikorsky's next-generation combat rescue helicopter for low-rate initial production, marking a big step to getting into the hands of airmen. The helo, known as the H-860W, includes better defensive systems, increased fuel capacity, and other performance improvements from the current G models used by the Air Force. The plan is to buy 113 of them, and 5 are currently under production up in Connecticut. Flight testing is also ongoing at Sikorsky's facility in West Palm Beach, Florida. And the U.S. and Poland have signed a deal that paves the way for more defense cooperation between the two nations. Most notable is that Poland is set to host a U.S. division headquarters, as well as an Air Force RPA squadron and an Army Combat Aviation Brigade, along with various special operations forces. That means it's safe to say that most Americans deploying to Europe in the next few years are likely headed for Poland. And the National Nuclear Security Administration is responsible for developing and maintaining America's nuclear production capabilities. And part of that is work on the next generation of nuclear gravity bombs, the B-61-12. To get more details on that bomb and why it could be delayed, Deputy Editor Aaron Mehta talked with the organization's head of defense programs.
Well, one of the weapon systems that's being worked on right now for the Life Extension Program is the B-61-12, which is a modernization of the basically airplane drop weapon, gravity weapon. Mm-hmm. The cost has been kind of moving as you've gotten more fidelity on it. But there was recently a report to Congress from folks that there was a technical issue with the B-61-12 that might cause some delays. Can you go into what that issue is and what kind of delays we're talking about?
So, gladly. So let me start by first saying there's really, when you start into a weapons development program, there's really at a high level, two things that you have to do. One is arrive at a design that will work and that you have confidence in that it meets requirements. The second step, which is a hard step, is to then gain confidence that it will still work 20 to 30 years into the future. Mm-hmm. So in this case, what we did is we identified a design, and we identified, in this case, all of the components that would go into the design based on testing, tests and things like that of the components. And that design works well. In fact, we've heavily and rigorously tested it to include many integrated flight tests, no failures. Knock wood, no failures. But what we did begin to find is when we then tried to do, so you say, how do you possibly predict that a component's going to last for 20 or 30 years? The standard practice has been to stress them, to take them up beyond the normal use range, to run them at 2 to 4 times the voltage, run them at higher temperatures, insult them with mechanical shocks. That's when we started to encounter some failures with very limited components. So in one sense, the design is showing it works, but we can't get the underpinning confidence to say it will work 20 or 30 years from now because of those failures. So we're taking the prudent of going back and changing out those few components with designs, or with components now that we have more fidelity that they will work 20 to 30 years out. It's interesting to note too that also if you go back and see when the B-51 started, the industry has changed. The standards that those components were designed to are not as rigorous as they're designed today. So now when we buy components, we know from the manufacturer's perspective already that they'll meet our requirements. That wasn't present when we first started the program. So it's a lesson that we're learning, and we're progressing forward, and we'll apply it to the next life extension program as we go. But this is one of those examples where a lot of the subject matter experts say, you know, this design could potentially work 20 or 30 years from now. We just can't get the data that would underpin that judgment that we think is critical to provide, is to have a database, not just, you know, not just solely based on subject matter expert.
So how much of a delay do you think this is going to cause?
You know, we're still working on that right now. It's probably going to be on the order of 16 months, 18 months. But what we also are trying to do at the same time, and that's to the time to, if you like, the first unit that's produced. What we are working on is since not, a vast majority of the components actually work, we're continuing to build them as if nothing, you know, no delays were present. So our hope is, and we're working hard to bring the last production unit back in. So it's not just a shift, of totally of 18 months. It may be a shift in the start of it, but the end will be brought back to where we're not going to have that long of a shift. That part is still being worked right now.
And those components, are these things that you can get off the shelf from different providers?
They're bought, you know, they're referred to as COTS, you know, they are off the shelf, but I mean, they're in other components, you know, they're used in DoD, they're used in private, you know, other private industries as well. It's just that, again, our environments are so much more stressing. Like I say, how do you look into a crystal ball and know that, and be able to say with confidence, and that's really the challenge, that this will continue to work 20 or 30 years into the future.
And these are the particularly weapons you don't want failing.
Yeah, that's right. You don't want these to fail, and you don't want to have to bring them back. You know, you don't want to find a surprise that makes you have to bring them back and work on them. So that's why I say it's the subject matter experts, and we agree with them, that you really want some kind of experimental evidence to support your assessment that they will work 20 to 30 years out.
All right, well, let's talk about plutonium pit production for a second, because this is an issue that's kind of been simmering for a while, and now you're starting to hear a lot more about it. There's a goal of getting 30 plutonium pits up, 80 pits a year, pardon me, at 2 different sites, kind of, I believe at 2030 is the goal there. There's been a Institute for Defense Analysis report that essentially said there's really no proof that they're going to be able to get to this point. Other skeptics have said this seems like a stretch, that they'll be able to reach this plutonium pit production number. What do you say to that report, to the critics, and is there any thought about maybe re-looking at this number and trying to loosen it a little bit?
So, you know, our view has been, we've been pretty forward with this, that we believe it is aggressive and it's only achievable with the adequate funding that we're projecting we need for it. We've been upfront and open about that from day one. But one thing I can say for certain, if we don't start, we won't finish. So I think it's an important goal. It's an important goal for the country to reestablish plutonium pit production. So I think it's something that, again, it's something that challenges the complex to strive for, and I think it's a good goal for the complex to be moving towards, you know, achieving the 2030 date. We're making some significant progress at Los Alamos already, and then once the preferred option is finally settled on, then we'll, you know, move out with Savannah River as well. We still have a number of things we have to do before that final decision is made. But again, I think it's a good goal for the complex to move to, and I think it's an important mission, so it deserves that attention, that we strive for it.
What are the potential roadblocks here?
You know, again, first, you know, one could be, there's things that are out of our control that have to do with funding. You know, we can propose, but we certainly don't get the final say on that. But you know, it's one of these things that we know technically it can be done because we had rocky flats in the past. So we know that, you know, technology has evolved, but we know that technically it can be done. So it's really getting the adequate, stable funding that we need to do it, and then going forward with implementing it. And so it's not that it's easy. It's actually a difficult. Making plutonium pits is not an easy technical challenge, But we have faith in the workforce, and we're training up the workforce to redo it. And as I say, we're making significant progress at Los Alamos now to show that we can do it.
One of the Air Force Chief of Staff's top priorities is multi-domain command and control, along with an airborne battle management system. So at the 2019 AFA Aerospace and Cyber Conference, Valerie and Senna talked with him about what it means and what progress is being made to implement those concepts.
You and I have talked a lot about multi-domain command and control. Can you kind of draw a line in the sand for where you want to be next year? And what should we be looking for? Is there going to be a line in the budget for this, perhaps? Or is there something specific that you want to accomplish with the Joint Staff?
Yeah, there'll be several lines in the budget. I was excited about the Secretary's speech today, talking about multi-domain operations as part of his speech. And so where I want to land is I want to make sure that we have advanced battle management exactly where it needs to be, because that is the pathfinder for multi-domain operations. I mean, when we took on this discussion with Congress as part of our 19 submission to move from a platform solution to a network solution, that was bigger than Joint STARS. It was about the future of joint warfighting. And we had to take on that discussion to explain where we were going. And so where you'll see me and the team relentlessly focused is on getting advanced battle management exactly where it needs to be in the year, so that all those that follow afterwards are now having a demand signal on how to connect into this network that we're building.
Can you say anything more about that advanced battle management? It's been very nebulous so far, what that's actually going to look like, whether that's just a network, whether that's going to be a network with maybe some new things running across it. Can you put a little structure there?
Yeah, it's actually, the way to look at it is it's common architecture. So think about your phone, right? You may have several different kinds of devices. You may have an Apple iPhone, you may have a Samsung, you may have, or you can have all kinds of different devices that come from a variety of different companies, but it's riding on a common it's riding on a common architecture. And every day, how many new apps do you have available to you to download if you wanted to, right? Think about apps as capabilities. How do we have the foundational architecture in place where all the devices can plug in, all the capabilities can plug in, and we can advance at a rate that the adversary just can't keep up with? That's how you bring multiple dilemmas. And so it's why I've used the Rubik's Cube example in terms of how many options can I bring to the table, because the Air Force of the future, it's going to be old and new. It's going to be manned and unmanned. It's going to be conventional and unconventional. I'm going to have things that are attributable, right? I want them to know it's me, and unattributable. They're going to guess where that came from, right? All of those attributes are going to be part of the future Air Force. The fundamental question is, how do we connect them? Advanced battle management is the pathfinder to be able to do just that.
To keep up to date with all of our coverage, be sure to visit our Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn pages. Also, be sure to add us on Apple's News app and other platforms for the latest updates. And when we come back, we'll look at the role of the B-52 in nuclear war. Built to fly in a nuclear war, the B-52 has performed a lot of missions in its long career. But now there's a focus back on the original mission. Here's a look at how crews at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana are working to do just that.
The idea of a nuclear war is horrifying. Nobody wants to have any part of that. If it comes to that, though, there can be nothing but success.
When you think of nuclear weapons, one aircraft stands out more than any other: the Boeing B-52. Designed to drop nuclear bombs from high altitude, the B-52 has been in the U.S. arsenal for more than half a century. And for about the first 30 years of its life, it was on continuous alert, ready to deliver nuclear weapons at a moment's notice. But then, in 1991, the Soviet Union fell, and everything changed.
I think we took, I don't know if you'll call it a mental vacation from the deterrence role. After what essentially was the end of the Cold War, there was a big dip in creative thought and everything else when it comes to that, because it seemed to be we were at the top, and there was essentially, in most people's minds, no peer threat.
But in recent years, a resurgent Russia and growing threat from China have forced a focus back onto the B-52's first mission: nuclear deterrence.
The bomber is that flexible, visible, and recallable arm of the triad. And one of the things that we're looking at is, how do we do ops better every day based on the environment? So, like Back in the day, it was a two-player game during the Cold War, right? Now you've got multiple players, different environments, and different considerations to include, we talk about extended deterrence for allies and things like that. So how do we better posture the force is what we're looking at every day.
One key part of that shift is the readiness of the crews that would fly those missions. From day one on the B-52, excellence and attention to detail are drilled into them, and there can be no mistakes.
We've got to be on our game 100% of the time. There's no room for error when you talk about the nuclear mission. And so knowing the weapon and the weapon system inside and out, and then really just being willing to execute the mission when they task you with it at a moment's notice. So we're always standing ready, always ready to defend the home front when called upon. There's a lot of things that go into just getting that weapon off the jet and onto its target, and so being ready at all times is really the big key there.
It's not a perfection is expected. It's a no-fail mission. Cannot fail. So they take that very seriously. We all take that very seriously. If they don't take that mission, that training mission on a Tuesday in Louisiana, if they don't take that seriously, then if they ever have to execute it for real, they can't be expected to perform the way they should.
I would say if there's one thing that hasn't changed from the 1960s and the Cold War to today is that safe, secure, and reliable execution of the nuclear mission. And the young airmen, the air crew that are out there do this day in, day out, and they have to split between conventional and a nuclear focus to make sure that we're ready to go at any moment's notice for either one. Because as we talk about strategic deterrence, isn't just nuclear, it's conventional as well.
So what type of nuclear weapons does the B-52 actually use? Well, they date back to the 1970s and are known as the AGM-86 air-launched cruise missile. The B-52 can carry 20 of these missiles, both under its wings and in the bomb bay. They're designed to be launched from outside the range of enemy air defenses, allowing the bomber to survive the mission. But the newest of those missiles were built in the 1980s, meaning that keeping them ready to fight can be challenging for munitions crews.
So starting in 1980 through 1984 was production period, so a lot of this stuff predates the airmen I have working on them. So while it was extremely sophisticated at the time, it's fallen out of favor. Some of that technology is requiring service life extensions where we identify maybe some high failure areas, things we need to replace. The Outcome had an initial service life of 10 years. It was really only meant to go to early to mid-90s, be replaced by the Advanced Cruise Missile. And while we fielded that, the Advanced Cruise Missile had some challenges. Logistically, maintenance was difficult, so we pushed through the Outcome even further. So now we're seeing where we have to try to find the industrial base that can match the technology from the 80s and bringing it to the 2010s and 20s.
And while those munitions crews are working to keep the AGM-86 in service, a replacement could be on the way. Known as the Long Range Standoff Weapon, or LRSO, both Lockheed Martin and Raytheon are competing to build the new missile, which is set to enter service in 2030. But until then, crews both at Barksdale and Minot Air Force bases stand ready to execute the nuclear mission, equipped with both old missiles and an even older bomber. And when we come back, we'll look at the struggle it can sometimes be to keep those aging bombers in the air. On this week's Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Brian Parker offers his latest tips.
When it comes to your hard-earned money, your mission should be to protect it. Your best defense in most cases is being one step ahead of the scammers. The easiest way to do that is to recognize a scam when you see one. Phone scams are a growing tactic because nearly all adults in the U.S. have a smartphone. If you do get an unexpected call regarding your Social Security, bank accounts, or insurance, you should have some reservations, but don't let yourself be pressured into giving your information away. If the caller pressures you, it's likely a scam. One way to be sure is to hang up immediately and find a legit phone number on your account statements. Call that number and go straight to the source. The same goes for suspicious texts and emails. Oftentimes you'll be presented with an offer that's just too good to be true. Don't fall for it. Or the message might reference a security issue with one of your accounts. Don't open or click on any links in your messages, especially if you don't know the sender. Do a quick search online for resources your bank or credit union might have to protect your accounts. Being proactive and at the ready gives you the upper hand.
Thanks, Brian. We'll see you next time. To get more defense news coverage, be sure to visit our website at defensenews.com and subscribe to our early bird brief, delivered to your inbox every weekday morning to get you ready to start the day. And when we come back, we'll look at how maintenance crews keep aging B-52s in the air. It's no secret that the B-52 is an old jet, and with that comes a lot of problems of keeping it flying. Here's an inside look at how maintenance crews do just that. It's a plane so old that 4 generations of American pilots have flown it. From pulling nuclear alert in the Cold War, to arc-light strikes in Vietnam, to precision cruise missile attacks in Desert Storm, the B-52 has done it all. But with the newest Stratofortress dating back to the 1960s, keeping these bombers flying isn't easy. And at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, there are decades of knowledge and heritage in everything that maintainers do.
It takes a lot of hard work, but the cool thing is whenever they made this jet, it's old school. So that's one of the best parts. So you have jets nowadays that are advanced composites, all that kind of stuff. However, the B-52, basic fundamentals, that's the best part. So you really get the chance to go and hone your skills, get the fundamentals of metalwork. It definitely is something that, as a sheet metal guy, that's my background. It's something that I learned how to go and hone my craft on this jet. It was just the fact that it was so basic, and when they did everything, it was bare bones, and they didn't put too much thought into it, didn't over-engineer. They went ahead and just made it just right, and it's lasted 59 years because of that. Some of the cool stuff is that when you have a part that's broke, you have to figure out, all right, so this is cracked, or this bracket's broken. Well, if I repair this, it's going to affect how it mounts against this part, and how it, this part is also damaged as well. So how am I going to repair it? So you have to step back. And the good thing is that it gives you the creativity to come up with the best way to repair the aircraft. Versus fighter jets, which tell you precisely what to do, it's somewhat robotic. B-52s are something that it's very versatile.
The age of these aircraft presents different challenges than any other plane the Air Force flies. And that means that the airmen sometimes have to get a little creative.
Parts sometimes are a little harder to get. Maintenance is a little more labor intensive. There's not a new part just sitting on a shelf ready to come out. So you have to be smart, you have to be careful what you're doing. You can't just go down to the store and get a new one.
We're also facing tires and brakes shortages. We have a lot of time and hours worn on them.
But some relief to those challenges could be on the way, as the Air Force is looking to give the B-52 a makeover, including new radar, avionics, and most importantly, new engines. The current Pratt & Whitney TF-33 turbofans date back to the 1960s and are showing their age, which is a big headache for maintainers.
The engines are just as old as the aircraft, so we're seeing a lot of engines we have to take down and replace, and to get in those replacement, we're waiting on our depot level maintenance to rebuild them.
The TF-33 engines that we have installed on the aircraft right now, there's not a sensor monitoring system, if you will. For example, an engine right now, we may see an indicator of an issue, but we don't know how long until it's going to fail until it actually does. In my world, we would like to prevent the failure from interrupting scheduled training or a mission. And of course, because right now there's 8 engines per aircraft, multiply that times how many aircraft we have, that is a lot of work on maintainers that we may be able to use differently in the future.
It's very exciting. Like I said, we've been having a lot of engine issues, and we're all looking forward to those new motors. They will definitely help the ability to turn this aircraft quicker.
The really neat thing about re-engineering the airplane is that it will actually end up paying for itself over time. With the reduced maintenance issues that you talked about, we'll never have to take an engine off the airplane to work on it. All of the predictive analysis that technology allows us to do, we can see problems coming, and we'll be able to work on the engine in a proactive as opposed to a reactive nature, and that'll help us to keep the airplane in the fight that much longer.
And while there's a long wish list for the B-52, some restraint has had to be used as the aircraft is still at the center of the Air Force's key nuclear deterrence mission.
If we want to modernize the entire fleet, I know my acquisition brethren would love to be able to load up as many modifications as possible at once, but we still have a mission to fly every single day. And if the President of the United States chooses to break that glass and use the B-52s in warfare, saying that I'm undergoing modifications is not going to be an acceptable answer.
Well, we're always excited about new upgrades to the aircraft, just like any other airframe. The aircraft was built in 1960. If you walk in the cockpit, it looks like a 1960 cockpit. It flies like a 1960 airplane. However, the avionics, the software, the weapon systems have to upgrade to meet the demands of the world, to meet the mission that the world demands. Many of the upgrades we have planned will really propel us and bring us fully into the 21st century.
And while the venerable bomber might be aging and old, the crews that fly and maintain it have no doubt about its ability once it takes off.
We all know how old that jet is, trust me, we all know. We know that it takes a lot of effort to go and get the thing up in the sky, but the thing that still impresses me is the amount of upgrades we've done over time. It is still relevant, and it's still lethal.
That's all we have time for this week, but if you want to see and read more, be sure to head over to defensenews.com. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.